Ópera apresenta Expogestão.
Bom dia. Thank you for that welcome. I'm sorry, but it's going to be in English, so I hope you have a translation. So this is a management conference. I hope that you came here to learn something about management. We just heard a wonderful new thing about management, and that is you should have a company that takes money in and then takes volunteers to do work for the company. This is a great business model. We charge people to volunteer their time, and they do it. Okay, well, you learned something today, a new business model. You also learned a quote from the previous CEO of General Electric. But I like actually this quote from the current CEO of General Electric, Jeff Immelt. He's very famous for saying, if you go to bed tonight, an industrial company, you will wake up tomorrow a software company. It's a very dangerous thought. The company is going to change, it's going to be disrupted in an enormous way. But you know what? You shouldn't be afraid, because this has happened before. I don't care if you call it the third industrial revolution or the fourth industrial revolution. Hizo said it's kind of the same industrial revolution that we started in the 19th century. Let's talk a little bit about that. How many of you remember the Industrial Revolution? Nobody remembers the Industrial Revolution? Nobody's over 100 years old? Okay, good. Starting in about 1840 and going to the end of the 19th century, there was a major revolution that moved human power into machines. Steam power first, then internal combustion engines and automobiles and trucking and so forth. But actually the first major change was these new jacquard looms, automated weaving devices. Anybody ever read about that? Anybody still awake, or did I put you all to sleep? Okay. There was an enormous movement that said we should stop this because there's going to take away jobs. The people that used to weave by hand now were tending machines. In the United Kingdom, there was a movement to destroy these automated weaving machines because they were destroying jobs. They were called the Luddites. Although I understand there are more people with a German background here in Joinville, there was also a movement in Germany called the Webers, who were going around destroying automated looms there as well because they were destroying jobs. And as you can see, there was, however, an increased GDP, PIB, per capita, enormous increased productivity. It depends on which economist you don't believe. I had to start today with a chart because yesterday my Shasa, Ricardo, showed you charts all night long. So we start with the chart to get you used to it. Economists say that productivity increased by approximately a factor of 4 during the 19th century in the industrialized world. An enormous increase. That productivity meant that for doing certain tasks, for example, weaving cloth, you did not need as many people, and that destroyed jobs and a huge social disruption. What came with that social disruption was the increased productivity. The increased productivity created increased consumer demand. The increased consumer demand created more jobs. At the end of the Industrial Revolution, there were more jobs than there were before. Not only because there were new jobs in creating that equipment, in building the machines and maintaining the machines, but the increased productivity created increased consumer demand, created increased number of jobs. You know, we saw this again in the late 20th century. Hizo said it sort of started in 1960. I don't remember 1960. I remember 1961, however. I was very, very young. And we started to see this in the internet when the web was created in 1995. So it's actually more than 25 years. It's 32 years today, when the first website went live in the early 1990s. And again, jobs were destroyed. Productivity, as you see, went up by a factor of 4, but jobs were destroyed. I don't know how many bookstores there are left in Brazil, but I will tell you the number of bookstores in Europe and the number of bookstores in the United States and North America in general has dropped very, very fast because people buy books online now. The largest bookseller in the world is Amazon.com, a company that didn't even exist 30 years ago. So jobs are destroyed, but jobs are created. In 1995, do you know how many webmasters there were? Anybody want to guess? Anybody going to answer my questions? In 1995, there was one webmaster in the whole world. His name was Tim. His name is still Tim. He's not a webmaster anymore. Now there are millions of webmasters. So jobs were created because of the new technology. And this new technology, internet technology, moved human interaction into machines. And now we all depend on our smartphones. We all depend on our connectivity by email. You know, I had email on my business card in 1978. We thought that was really impressive, but no one knew what it was. Now we all have email on our business cards. Well, I'm here to tell you, as Hizo just told you, it's happening again. But this time, what we're going to do is take that internet technology, the movement of human interactivity into computers, and add it to industrial systems. Because I'm here to tell you a big surprise, that has not happened yet. In 1978, I built an expert system that automated the correction of a Modicon 584 programmable controller. It doesn't matter what it is. A programmable controller runs a factory. And what was interesting about that machine, even though it was a computer which ran the factory, shave a piece off the metal, drill a hole in the metal, sand the metal, and so forth, and our factory was making brake linings, that computer didn't talk to the other computers in the factory. For example, the manufacturing resource planning, so that you know what you were creating and when you were creating it, when it would be delivered, and so forth. If you wanted to connect those computers, you had to print out data from the programmable controller and type it back into the manufacturing resource planning system. We are now almost 40 years later, and it's still true. PLCs, programmable logic controllers in factories, do not talk to the information systems in factories. It's crazy. The revolution that we've seen in music, the revolution that we've seen in books and in newspapers, the revolution that we're seeing in the recording industry did not happen in industrial systems, especially manufacturing and production, but healthcare and agriculture and so many different fields. That's what we're going to see. Take the internet revolution and add it to the industrial revolution. And we think there'll be another huge increase in productivity, and there will be a loss of jobs. And afterwards, there will be more jobs than there had been before. How big is that? Well, for that, we have to ask the economists. One of the best reports was published 5 years ago by Marco Nunziato, who is the chief economist of General Electric. And he said, of the world economy, which in 2012 was $70 trillion, $70 million, 46% has not been affected yet by the internet. $32.3 trillion. It's a lot of money. Roughly 100 trillion reais. If you look at other numbers, Cisco, for example, says private sector profits increased 21%. That's $19 trillion additional to the global economy by 2020. That's only 3 years away. This is a major change. Some more numbers. Gartner, the analysts, say that expect an incremental revenue of about $300 billion by 2020. McKinsey says it's a $36 trillion operating costs, savings and new revenue for affected industries. It's a huge impact to the world. Now, you've already heard one word for this, Industry 4.0. The Germans call it Industry 4.0. I call it Industry Fear Not. We call it the industrial internet, and why? Because it's the application of internet technology to industries, to healthcare, to manufacturing, to production. In the US, it's often called cyber-physical systems. The Japanese also call it that. The Chinese have variously called it Internet Plus or Internet China 2025. The French call it Industrie du Futur. It has many different names, but the idea is very simple. Take the technology that we've developed for the internet and apply it to industrial systems. How do we get there? We could hope that the security vendors would talk to the IT vendors. We could hope that the operational technology vendors would talk to the manufacturing execution systems vendors. We could hope that the mining companies will talk to the banks and figure out where they're doing things that are very similar to each other. But the fact is, we need to learn together, as Hizo was just saying, how to use this technology and how it will disrupt industries. People ask me, what is the first industry that will be disrupted? And I say, I don't know. You know, Steve Jobs had a wonderful quote that he used to say all the time, which is, if you want to know what the future is, then you should invent the future. It's really hard to figure out what the future will be unless you actually make that future come to pass. So that's what we're doing at the Industrial Internet Consortium. That's also what the ABI is focused on, figuring out what the future will be by inventing that future. Today we have hundreds of companies, nearly 300 companies, and government agencies, and research institutions, and universities, and testing laboratories working together to figure out how will we apply internet technology to power generation, distribution, and transmission. How will we apply internet technology to manufacturing and production? How will we apply internet technology to healthcare systems? How will we apply internet technology to mining? Have you thought about that? I'll give you an example at the end of this short talk. So, March 27th, 2014, 5 companies agreed to work together, even though they are competitors in some ways and they cooperate in some ways. We have a word for that, they call it coopetition. And they said, we know our industries are going to be transformed. And in order to figure out what those industries, how those industries will be transformed, we will work together to do the transformation ourselves. In essence, they said, we will be disrupted. Instead of waiting for some other company, some innovative little company to disrupt us, we will disrupt ourselves. These 5 companies, in alphabetical order, AT&T, Cisco, General Electric, IBM, and Intel, came together March 27, 2014, and said, we will build test beds to find out how is it that our industries will be disrupted. Since then, some 300 companies have joined. So our leadership is from Bosch, EMC, General Electric, Huawei, IBM, Intel, SAP, and Schneider. I hope you see that those are big companies, and those are companies from all over the world, and they are companies that are focused on industry and on technology. 55% of our member companies are actually small companies, less than 50 million US in annual turnover. And we also have several dozen research organizations, universities, and also government agencies. So you see, for example, there are government agencies from the United States, from France, from Sweden, from Japan. What's driving this now? I promised when I agreed to speak here to talk about not the technology, but disruption in industry. My background is technology, but really what we're talking about is a disruption in the way mining is done, a disruption in the way healthcare is done, a disruption in the way banking is done. And what's happening is none of this technology is new. It's been around for a long time. We're seeing a convergence of information technology and operational technology that is going to disrupt all of your industries, all of your businesses. I don't know how long it will take, but I know that the disruption is coming. And it's better to be part of that disruption than to wait for that disruption. One of the things that comes from is cheap sensors. Most presentations about the industrial internet start with a statement that they're going to be 75 billion, 85 trillion, 95 quadrillion, I don't know, some number of sensors. That's not important. There will be sensors everywhere. What's important is that they be cheap. The cost of sensors has dropped to near zero. The processing power to do something interesting with the information from those sensors is near zero. Let me give you an example. Anybody ever been on an airplane? Nobody's ever been on an airplane? Anybody here from Embraer, perhaps? No, okay, too far. A typical jet engine on a commercial aircraft collects data on that engine through the entire flight. The compression ratios of the various compressors inside the engine, the bending of the blades inside the engine, the airflow, the bypass airflow around the outer core of the engine, and so forth. After a 6-hour flight, a jet engine can land with as much as a terabyte of data, a trillion bits of data. And that data can be used to make the jet more efficient, to find out exactly why it's not operating at perfect efficiency already. We haven't been doing that because the amount of data was enormous and because those jet engines were not connected to the internet. Today, they're being connected to the internet. It's far more important than it was before. If Malaysia flight that disappeared over the Indian Ocean had been constantly connected to the internet, rather than just connected to Inmarsat every 6 minutes, we probably would know where it is. The internet connects almost everything in the world, we think. Our intelligent phones are connected to the internet, our watches are connected to the internet. We're connected to the internet all the time. Why aren't our airplanes? Because of this separation between operational technology and information technology. But we're facing a world in which there will be connected everything. By 2020, 7 times the number of sensors in the world than people in the world. That's a huge number. And there are a lot of people in the world, but not so many here, but especially in India and China. Processing that much data has been really expensive in the past. 20 years ago, processing a terabyte of data in anything like real time was extremely expensive. Now it's cheap. You rent the processors from Amazon Web Services or Google Web Services or IBM Web Services or Salesforce or one of the others. You can use the processors just for the time that you need them and then stop using them. You might pay just a few reais for all of the big data analysis that you want. The data analysis packages themselves have a starting price of 0. That's fantastic. This is a huge change, a change that is affecting everything about our industries. We can now collect enormous amounts of data about what's going on in our industries, no matter what the industry is. We can process that data in real time, and we can use it to make our industries more efficient, more productive. You may be asking, and Kizo did actually mention that standards are going to be important, and they will be important in this space. But we don't know what standards to build. How do you know how to solve the problem of connecting systems until you've actually tried connecting them? The problem with standards is there are too many that have nothing to do with anything. In fact, I've been in the standards world now for 28 years, and we have a saying, that's the great thing about standards, there are so many to choose from. There are all sorts of standards that simply don't matter because nobody uses them. What we are doing with our test beds is learning what standards are necessary and sharing that information with standards organizations, such as the ones that are listed here, the Object Management Group, which I also lead, the IEEE, OASIS, and many other standards. About 30 standards organizations and 30 more will be joining as liaison organizations over the next year. We are learning what standards are necessary, technical standards. We are learning what are the best practices for hiring people for the industrial internet. We are learning what are the best practices for finding partnerships, building ecosystems, because the value chain now changes. This is a management issue, it's not a technical issue. What are the best practices for building tools, for building groups, for building focus around a new business model? I'll talk about some new possible business models. How do you get to what the new business models are? We don't necessarily know. We have to start building these test beds to learn what is possible, what is enabled, what changes. So what we do is we do what we call test beds. Accelerate the creation of test beds by actually designing possible outcomes. We bring together potential users, mining companies, agriculture companies, healthcare companies, with potential technology companies, RFID companies, security companies, data analysis companies, and so forth, and figure out what is it we want to achieve and why. What is the outcome that makes the most sense? It's a scientific study, really. Then we create an operational implementation, and we experiment. We have today 27 test beds. They are in many, many different markets. As you can see, some of them focus on asset efficiency and productivity. Some of them focus on government services. Some of them focus on agriculture. Some of them focus on manufacturing and production. Some of them focus on healthcare. I'm going to talk about 2 that I think it's interesting to hear what sorts of things that we've started to learn as we have been building test beds for the last 2 years. I'll start with this one in the lower right-hand corner. We call it the track and trace test bed. This test bed is led by Bosch. I'm sure many of you have heard of Bosch, a large automotive and white goods manufacturer based outside Stuttgart in Germany. Bosch said, what is it that we could do if we could track everything in a factory? The people, the parts, the tools, and the work in progress. It just doesn't matter what the technology is. They happened, for the first phase, they used Wi-Fi routers. The triangulation of the Wi-Fi router signals, they could find where everything is in the factory within 1 meter. What can you do with that information? This was really the question. What changed the way that you could make the factory more efficient? Could you make the factory more efficient? And they said, well, we think so. They do all sorts of interesting things. For example, because of the participation of the largest union in Germany, they measure where people are compared to where the robots are to make sure that robots are not operating anywhere near human beings. That's normally done in factories today using cages, using wire. But you could do it by tracking the locations of people and robots in the factory. They also keep track of where the tools are in the factory, so you can make sure that you're using a tool in a safe way and you're not taking it outside of the safe area. Their system will actually warn the users, please bring the tool back to this place because it's in a dangerous place now, somebody could be hurt. There's another reason for that, by the way. One of Bosch's biggest customers has a factory. I'm not going to tell you where it is because this is not a nice story. The people that work in this factory spend half of their time looking for the tool they need. 50% of the time is looking for the tool they need. They tried to solve this in the past by making sure the tools had to go in a specific place. Drills had to go here, screwdrivers had to go there, and so forth. Now what they do is you just put the tool down wherever you want. The factory knows where the tools are and says, for your next task, you need a fastening device. It's 10 meters behind you on the left side. Imagine the change when the factory knows exactly what's going on inside the factory floor. Bosch has been so successful leading this with the support of Tech Mahindra, a systems integrator based in India, and SAP, the software company in Germany, as well as National Instruments, which is a hardware maker in southern United States. They've been so successful with this test bed that they're now rolling it out to all of their factories worldwide, 250 factories. Not just for safety, the factory then knows exactly when the work in progress is going to be finished and where there's going to be space on the factory floor. So it's perfect for just-in-time delivery of raw materials into the factory and perfect for just-in-time exit of finished devices out of the factory. They've actually started into the second phase now where they're locating things in the factory within 5 centimeters. So they know which part you're putting onto which work in progress and who's doing the work. It does amazing things. There's a fastening device, for example, which is connected to the internet. They fasten a bolt onto the work in progress and it automatically stops at the right torque. So it doesn't over-tighten the bolt. Because it knows who's holding the fastening device, which device it is, which bolt it is, and which work in progress. Simply by knowing where everything is in the factory. So we're learning how manufacturing will work over the next years. I'll give you another example. In Southern Ireland, we have a test bed called Infinite. It stands for something, but I never remember what. This is a really fascinating idea. The idea is, what can we learn by connecting the national resources of the health system, or in general, national resources of the Republic of Ireland, with the provincial resources of the local province of Cork. In Ireland, they're called counties, the same as your states. The starting point was, what can we do if we connect the health resources of the national, which are national in Ireland? So if your national health record is always stored in the national data banks, with the ambulance services, which are managed by the County of Cork. Why would you do that? Well, we learned very quickly why you would do that. If the ambulance knows where it's going and they know who they're going to treat, they can download directly from the national health resources all of the health data of the person they're going to see. and know whether that person is diabetic or has Alzheimer's disease or some other disease that needs to be treated in a specific way. More importantly, on the way back to the hospital with the person in the ambulance, whatever the paramedics do in the ambulance, they upload back to the National Health Resources and to the hospital. I'm sure some of you have seen a usual handoff in an emergency room or emergency ward between paramedics in an ambulance and the doctors and nurses in the hospital. It's chaos. It's horrible. Not in the hospitals in County Cork. In County Cork, that information is already in the hospital when the ambulance arrives at the hospital. They know what they're treating. They know how the paramedics have pre-treated. They know what they're facing. The lead on this was originally EMC. As many of you know, partially some of you have worked at that company. EMC was bought by Dell, so it's now led by Dell EMC. Interestingly enough, there's the support of the Irish national government, the County Cork government, and a local university, Cork University of Technology, participating as well. The telephone service, which is provided for the ambulances, is provided by a company which is not a member of IIC, so it's on the slide, but I won't say it aloud. The market they've focused on has been ambulances originally, but there are many other services that the county offers its citizens which will be added to this system. They could be as simple as road services and repair of water lines and electric lines and so forth. But it's already amazing what you can do. We actually think that we have probably saved lives. What you learn from building test beds is that there are things that you had no idea were coming. So I'll give you a little story about this one. I visited this test bed about 1 year ago, and the local manager from Dell EMC said to me, "We have a problem, and we're going to have to stop the test bed." And I said, "Why is that?" And they said, "Well, all of the ambulance drivers are going to go on strike." And I said, "Why? Do they think they're French?" Thank you for the few of you that laughed at that. No, he said, the problem is the ambulances are all outfitted with GPS locators because we need to know where the ambulances are and which one is the closest to the crash site or to the person in trouble, so we can send the closest ambulance. And the problem is we took all of the data from the ambulance GPS locators and we discovered that some of our drivers spend a lot of extra time after a call in the coffee shops instead of bringing the ambulance back to the garage. And I said, "That's good. This is Ireland. It's better that they're coffee shops." Thank you again. He didn't think that was funny, by the way. I said, "What do you care that they bring them back to the garages? Really, you are measured by how quickly you respond to an emergency call. That's what's important, not how long they spend in coffee shops. Why not close the garages, let them sit at the coffee shops? In fact, buy them a parking space at the coffee shops, and then send the nearest ambulance from the coffee shop to the crash site or to the old folks' home or to wherever the person in trouble is. You don't care if they're in coffee shops." They have been bringing the ambulances back to the hospitals and back to the garages since the beginning of time, so it's the way they think. But the way that you always do things is not usually the best thing to do. It's simply the way you always do things. The most important thing to learn about change management, and frankly, this is an issue of change management, not of technology. People do things the way they do things because it's the way they do things. There's no reason. This is what they're trying now. In fact, I said to them, you could choose the coffee shops that are nearest the most dangerous road intersections. You could choose the coffee shops that are nearest the old folks' home. You could choose the most dangerous sections of the city. Of course, Cork has no dangerous sections, like Joinville of City. Now, São Paulo, it's another story, but don't guess. You now have detailed information by GPS location of where all of the dangerous parts of County Cork are, because it's the places the ambulance have been called over the last year. Take that data, it's a large amount of data, but take that data, correlate it with the coffee shops, choose the coffee shops nearest the dangerous parts of the county, and place the ambulances there. As long as they respond quickly, you don't care where they started out. This is what they're doing. My point is not specifically about ambulances, although I suspect some of you are interested in ambulances. My point is, when you have an enormous amount of data about your operations, you can do things that you never thought possible. That's what's new, this convergence of your operational information with your information technology, your operational technology with your information technology. It's a huge step forward. I, however, am not going to take a huge step forward. I'll give you as a final example what can be done in the mining world. Does anybody recognize this picture? Anybody? What was that? This is a mine. I can't hear you, sorry, but this is a mine. Its name is Chuquicamata. Anybody ever been to Chuquicamata? It's not that far from here. One mining engineer, thank you, sir. Although you're probably lying. Chuquicamata is the largest open pit mine in the world. They have been mining there since 1870. Next to the mine is a pile of mining slag that has been growing for 150 years. There's more copper in the slag in the mountain next to Chuquicamata than in most copper mines anywhere else in the world. 1/3 of the world's copper comes from this one mine. It's run by Codelco. It's in northern Chile in the Atacama Desert. It's 6 kilometers north to south and 2 kilometers east to west. It's a kilometer down to the floor. It takes so long for the trucks to come from the base of the mine all the way to the top. They have started mining underground, underneath the strip mine. Kind of amazing. So what can the problems be in the mining world? Well, there are many. Codelco, like most mining companies, is experimenting with automated vehicles. So these are huge trucks. They look like a normal truck. I don't have a picture. It looks like a normal truck, but it's the size of a house. You don't really even notice that it's not a normal truck until you see the place where the driver used to sit, and it's a tiny little dot on the top of the truck. They carry hundreds of tons of copper ore. Those are now automated, not at this mine, but at Teniente mine in central Chile. They're completely automated, and they no longer have any accidents. They no longer hit each other. What they were looking for, Codelco, is guaranteeing safety inside the mine. So what you would want to do, of course, is build some sort of wireless network inside the mine so you can track where the miners are, where the equipment is, and where the potential dangerous sites, pressure changes, and so forth are in the mine. They came to us and they said, we have an idea about collecting data from all over the mine, but we don't understand how to build a wireless network in a mine. Now, are there some electrical engineers in the audience? Well, there must be some, but you're hiding. I'll tell you a fact, for those of you who are not electrical engineers, you cannot build a wireless network in a copper mine. It's against the law of nature. So in fact, in the copper mine, they use bullhorns, they yell at each other, and they use bells, just like in the 19th century. They said, is there something that we could do that's better than that? Because we need to ensure that when there are pressure changes, that means there might be a collapse inside the mine. We want to get people out of the mine and to safety as quickly as possible. As I'm sure you know, Chileans take mining safety extremely seriously, to the point of drilling for 33 lost miners a couple of years ago and getting them all out safely. What we did was help to build an ecosystem, bring together the mining company with technology companies that could solve parts of the problem. A Japanese maker of a vest that would measure the heartbeat of the miner and the blood pressure of the miner and the temperature and the oxygen level and the carbon monoxide level, carbon dioxide level around the miner, and also pressure changes. But how to communicate that back out of the mine to a computer system that keeps track of where all the miners are and the safety and health of those miners. We can't build a wireless network. Well, one possibility is to have a wire that goes to every miner. That's not a good possibility. Instead, what we said was, what if the miners are the network? You can't build a general wireless network inside a copper mine because of the way copper works, but you can build a point-to-point network. This is what we call line of sight, from one miner to the next miner. And you can network through those miners themselves. So what we did was we talked to the maker of the jackets and we said, put a wireless router in the jacket so every miner becomes part of the network, him or herself. That then goes to a network node that goes to a cable, and the cable goes out of the mine. And if we can build this, and we're in the middle of planning it now, we will eventually save the lives of miners. It makes you think about connections in a very different way than the way we've thought of before. In fact, my son is a specialist in connected vehicles. And when I say connected vehicles, people always think autonomous vehicles, cars that drive themselves, trucks that drive themselves. You know, there are other possibilities for connected vehicles. I don't know what kind of car that you drive, but my car is a Mexican car. It was made in Salinas, Mexico. It says Ford on it. My wife is patriotic. She drives an American car. It says Toyota. It's made in Kentucky. It's an American car. My car has more than 80 computers in it. 80 computers. My car has over 100 million bytes of storage in it. It is a computer. My car is connected to the internet. Most new cars have some possible connection to the internet. And my car right now is parked at an airport 9,000 kilometers from here. That's an interesting thing. It's a mobile data center doing nothing right now. I could sell its compute power, I can sell its intelligence while it's doing nothing. In fact, in most of the world, automobiles are parked and unused 94% of the time. Only 6% are they actually moving. This mining idea gave us the idea that perhaps we could connect the cars, and the cars could be a communications mechanism, the cars could be a computational mechanism, a data center. You think about it, there are billions of cars in the world. Most of them are not in use. As they become more and more intelligent and connected to the network, they will be a data center that I can access anywhere. Already in Japan, Toyota has an experiment running today, a test bed running today, in which, in an emergency situation, they use the cars to be the communications mechanism. As you know, there are serious emergencies in Japan that come from earthquakes and tsunamis. When the cellular network and the telephony network fails, they can't afford to have satellite networks everywhere in the country. So instead, Toyota is building a network which uses the automobiles en route, hop to hop to hop to hop, car to car to car to car, for communication, emergency communications to fire brigades and police and national emergency response teams and so forth. This is the future we're looking at. We're looking at opportunities not just for networking and how to use networking, but we're looking at opportunities that change the way we think about these problems. I think, in fact, we're talking about a future that looks very different than today. But the most important thing is what looks different is the services that have replaced products. I'd like to talk about two of these examples. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a jet engine. Any of you own a jet engine? I didn't think so, I don't either. Jet engines used to always be bought. And in fact, if you went to General Electric or Rolls-Royce or Comac or another jet engine manufacturer 20 years ago, they would happily sell you an engine for about 80% of the cost of that engine. They would lose money on the transaction. Why? Because for the next 40 years, they would make 4 to 5 times the cost of that jet engine in parts and maintenance of the engine. So they make plenty of money on the engine. They could afford to take a loss on the original sale of the engine. If you go to General Electric or Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney today to buy an engine, they will sell you the engine if you insist on buying it. But what they'd rather do is lease you the engine for a certain number of hours, a certain amount of propulsion measured in tens of thousands of pounds. Sorry, but they still measure it in pounds. And they will guarantee the fuel use. If you use more than that much fuel for that much propulsion, they will pay for the fuel. In fact, General Electric will lower by 1% every year for the life of the lease the fuel guarantee. So they will guarantee that the fuel use will go down. How can they do that? Well, very simple. General Electric knows more about General Electric engines than any other company on the planet. They've made them all. They track them all, and they're collecting terabytes, thousands of terabytes of data every day from jet engines that they made all over the planet. So they can track exactly how to best maintain that engine to maximize productivity, maximize efficiency, minimize fuel use. In fact, as I said, they believe that the amount of fuel that would be used over the first year of leasing engines instead of selling them would drop by 1%. 1% doesn't sound like much. That's 60 billion US dollars every year, 200 billion reais per year on a 1% drop in fuel use. Worth doing, don't you think? It turns out that most airlines are used to the idea of leasing instead of buying now anyway, because they lease aircraft, because it's more efficient use of the funds, more efficient use of money, since capital, the number one use of capital at airlines is, of course, the airplanes. But this is rapidly changing the business model for jet engine manufacturers and for airlines. Now I want to talk about changing business models, because think about what this means for your business. They're now leasing instead of selling. Changed from a capital sale to a lease. What they report to their shareholders completely changes. Rather than depreciating over the cost of capital, they're depreciating it over the life of the lease. The lease might be 40 years. They will eventually make more money than they had made when they were selling the aircraft engines. But it changes the business model. It changes the accounting model. It changes the revenue model. It changes the profit model. This is a management change. This is a hugely disruptive change. And the only way we're going to understand what that change is by trying it. That's what we're doing. I promised to give you one more example, so I'll give you that example as well. Anybody know what that device on the right-hand side is? The little blue device? I'm sorry for those of you who know. It's called a pulse oximeter in English. It measures your pulse, and more importantly, it measures how much oxygen is in your blood. It guesses how much oxygen is in your blood by looking through your skin and through the walls of your arteries into your arteries to guess how much oxygen is in your blood. Why do I keep saying guess? Because it is known that the best pulse oximeters made in the world are only about 80% correct. 20% of the readings are garbage. Unfortunately, nurses know this, and so they usually will ignore one or two alarms from the pulse oximeter because they figured, well, it's just a bad reading. It's okay. And anyway, you have 4 minutes with no oxygen to your brain before anything bad happens. Good news. One of the strangest things about pulse oximeters is, I'll teach you something for those of you who are not nurses or doctors. You should never put a pulse oximeter on the same arm where you put a blood pressure cuff. Blood pressure cuff pumps up every 15 minutes and then slowly lets the air out of the cuff and measures your blood pressure. Can you see why you should not put it on the same arm as a pulse oximeter? Because when the blood pressure cuff pumps up, there is no oxygen in your blood, and the pulse oximeter emits an alarm. Nurses know this, but if they're in an intensive care unit with 50 patients, they're in a hurry, they might forget and accidentally put a blood pressure cuff on the same arm as the pulse oximeter. So the obvious thing to do would be to say, when the blood pressure cuff is blown up, don't measure the oxygen in the blood, because we already know it's going to be 0. Do you know how many do that? How many pulse oximeters are connected to blood pressure cuffs anywhere in the world? 0. Why? Because they're on different networks with different protocols built by different companies to different standards. And changing that is going to require healthcare organizations all over the world to approve new blood pressure cuffs, new networks, and new pulse oximeters. It's going to take years. I know of 3 labs that are building it now, one in the US, one in Germany, one in Japan. I'm sure there are others as well, but there's none on the market. And in the meantime, people die because you get a bunch of warnings that are ignored because they don't realize it really is oxygen going down in the patient's blood. This is very personal for me. My father-in-law was in the hospital, and his oxygen level did fall below a certain level for too long a time, and it led to his death almost 3 years later. It's something we're actually working on in our clinical care test bed, and something I think that I hope that will be ready soon and will change the world. I will leave you with our usual thought, which is things are coming together. We're going to solve these problems. We're going to learn what the new business models are by actually doing it. And we'd love to have you join us and participate. We have the same business model as ABII, which is we charge you to volunteer your time. But we find the opportunity to work with competitors and cooperating organizations on problems like this will save money and will save lives. This is how to find me. I live half the year in Boston, half the year a little bit closer to you in southern Chile. And a great picture of me that was taken 45 kilos ago. Thank you very much.
Expogestão.